Okay, so now we're kind of transitioning from the Paleolithic, which was kind of hunter-gatherer, into the Neolithic period. And basically, the Paleolithic period was the old Stone Age, and the Neolithic period is the new Stone Age. Yeah, so the new Stone Age seems to have arisen in what is now northwestern Iraq between 9000 and 6000 BCE. So this is basically when people gradually transition from the nomadic hunter-gatherer societies into a more stable life of farming and animal husbandry. So animal husbandry is when you're like a herder, where you like keep sheep, and then any kind of keeping of animals, domesticated animals, is called animal husbandry. So basically, farming and animal husbandry, provided a more stable life, less of a nomadic existence. This is kind of the time of the agricultural revolution, and this caused major shifts from hunting and gathering to growing crops and keeping animals. And villages began to form around the fields, and the first examples of architecture can be found in these early Neolithic sites. Crops also, obviously, with the kind of the central food of these people, and they required storage. So clay storage vessels are among some of the most significant artifacts from this period, which is a little different than the hunter-gatherer society. They didn't store as many seeds or crops as the Neolithic peoples did. So with this great shift in living patterns, art became different as well. So they had more geometric patterns, they had more abstraction. So just remember, Paleolithic art is much more naturalistic, whereas Neolithic art is more geometrically abstracted. So much more abstract, much more geometric. Neolithic art shows abstract designs that embellished items that were used in daily life. The dominant themes were still derived from plants and animals, but just, like I said, more abstracted, more geometric. And we'll take a look at a earthenware beaker with ibexes. It's from Susa, Iran. It's 4000 BCE. It's painted terracotta. So earthenware is basically the same thing as a terracotta, but so it's about 11 inches high. It was first developed in the city of Susa on the Iranian plateau, and there are solid bands present in the design, and these are often called registers. You can see solid bands or registers that run around this vase in various locations throughout it. So basically the upper zone of the vessel features these highly abstracted long-necked birds, and they almost create like a pattern at the top because of their frequency and regularity, and they're just exactly alike. And then there's dogs that run below, very abstracted. Like I said, the Neolithic art is much more abstracted. They're running in this register here. And then below that is a very stylized goat or ibex. You can see the horns are curling here. Very triangular, which is the geometric abstraction. And then there's a circle here that you can see that the horns form. So you can actually, if you compare this to the cave in France, the Chauvet cave in France, you can see the difference between the Neolithic and the Paleolithic styles very clearly. So we'll take a look at a burial urn from China, the Neolithic period, 2200 BCE. It's a pottery with painted decoration. The height of it is about 14 inches. It's a very fine example of Neolithic pottery from China. It's from the Kansu province. It's a burial urn, and it basically features this bold interlocking design that resembles the bottom of a cowrie shell, which is a type of seashell, I believe. And it's definitely a motif that's borrowed from nature, but it's highly abstracted and stylized, which is definitely something that happened in the Neolithic. Still a natural, something that comes from nature, but just much more stylized and abstracted. And so we'll talk about Neolithic structures. That this is the first time that we start really during the Neolithic seeing structures being made by humans, because they're more sedentary now. They stay in the same place. They're not as nomadic as they were when they were hunter-gatherers. So Most Neolithic structures are very primitive, but we can talk about Stonehenge in south central England, and it's more of an example of sophisticated Neolithic architecture. And it was built in layers over more than a millennium. The oldest phase is actually the outermost circular ditch and a bank, so that you can see that in the ground here. So this ditch is the oldest part of Stonehenge. Um, and they date from about 3200 BCE. The bank actually has a road running through it, and that aligns with the northernmost midwinter moonrise. And this orientation may have been important in funeral rituals of the people that use the site. And at the same time that this ditch was built, there was a wooden structure originally in the center area, but later phases, the people replaced the wooden structures with these huge stones, which are monoliths, weighing around 20, some of them are 25,000 tons, and they were brought from a quarry 19 miles away. Don't ask me how they pulled that off back then. But these stones are basically forming kind of a semicircle surrounded by a ring of posts and lintels. So you can see that, posts and lintels. Posts, upright posts with a lintel on top on a lot of these. Some of the lintels have fallen off, but so some of the stones feature carvings of daggers and axes. There are a lot of burials that can be found around Stonehenge, and most of the dead that they've found have some sort of trauma or wound. So definitely this is kind of a funerary site, that at least they believe that it is. There's also an upright heel stone that was placed so it aligns with the midsummer moonrise. It's actually not pictured here, I don't believe. The function of Stonehenge is not known. It's definitely a matter of debate, but they think it was a funerary site for funerary rites. Might have had various functions at various times as well. So we're going to kind of talk about Bronze Age Mesopotamia. We know about the artifacts. We can look at the artifacts found and see that early civilizations emerged independently at different times throughout many areas of the world. So we've been able to find different artifacts and see that, civilizations emerged independently at different times throughout the different areas of the world. Civilization is a term that describes cultures with complex social orders with relatively high degree of technical development and innovation. So they're using technology to some extent. Some key elements of civilization are food production through agriculture and animal husbandry, occupational specialization, so people that actually had one job that they specialized in, such as like back in the day, probably like a blacksmith would be an example of that, or a baker. People that just specialized in one thing, that's something that comes along with a little bit more of an advanced civilization. Advanced civilizations also had writing and production of bronze. Bronze was made by melting lead and tin together. So all these developments made it possible for larger groups of people to live in larger urban areas or even agricultural areas, but they formed communities. And so the rise of bronze kind of starts to happen, and we see larger civilizations, larger communities, and bronze also made for better weapons. And so having these weapons actually made for larger empires. So we see the emergence of larger empires. I'm just checking to see what time it is. Okay, we're doing well. So we'll keep going. So with bronze came the weapons, came larger empires. So the area that we'll talk about is Mesopotamia. It's basically the plain between the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers. Basically, it means the land between two rivers, I believe in Greek. So today, the area is located in central and northern Iraq. And the geography of Mesopotamia made it vulnerable to constant invasion. So the area is basically constantly being ruled by a succession of different peoples and different tribes. So one group will take over, and then the next group takes over, and then the next group. But they all kind of have similar civilization, even though they're at war with each other all the time. The ancient civilizations present in Mesopotamia basically were in existence during the same time that the ancient Egyptians were, but the urban civilization in Mesopotamia developed slightly earlier than the ancient Egyptians. And it's believed that the early ancient Egyptians borrowed a lot from Mesopotamia because Mesopotamia was first. The first civilization arose in Mesopotamia in the southernmost part. It's a plain, and it's called the area of Sumer, or Sumer. I think it's Sumer. And the Sumerians were believed to be the first peoples to develop, a system of writing. They also developed the wheel and the plow, is what they believe the Sumerians did. So here's Mesopotamia. It's right in between the Tigris and the Euphrates River. It's a very fertile plain, great place for growing crops. Every year, I'm sure these rivers probably, flooded. You could irrigate from them, and there was probably really rich soil that was being washed down from, maybe from the mountains. Rivers carry a lot of silt and good soil, and obviously the water is great for growing crops as well. So Sumer had city-states and a religion, and basically the state and religion and government, they were all one. There was no separation of church and state in Sumer. And the priests elected the rulers, and the Sumerians worshipped nature gods in temples that sat on platforms called ziggurats. And ziggurats were built in the center of each city-state. And they kind of resemble like a stepped pyramid almost. We'll take a look at a ziggurat here in Iraq, one of the earlier ones. Ziggurat of Ur-Nammu, it's 2100 BCE, and it's in Iraq. And it's basically the ziggurat was their temple. It's a type of sacred mountain, and it reached towards the heavens. It was built on a large platform, and it's sort of a link between heaven and earth. It was believed that heaven was in the sky. A lot of cultures, ancient civilizations, believed that heaven was above us. And so it's kind of like they're trying to reach the heavens by building this temple up higher on this platform. They're built of sun-baked bricks that were, and they were once faced with ceramic bricks that were actually fired in a kiln and painted with glaze. So those have since, fallen away, and now you can see just the sun-baked bricks. But like I said, they were once covered with ceramic bricks that were glazed and fired in a kiln. So basically, the ziggurat is two successively smaller platforms on a solid base with a shrine at the very uppermost level. And the temple was closer to heaven. Only the priests and the priestesses were allowed to use the temple. So this is not like a public thing for everybody to use. Just the highest members of society, the priests and priestesses, were able to use the temple. So very little Mesopotamian architecture remains because it wasn't built from stone, because they just didn't have stone in this area. So they had to use sun-baked brick, which unfortunately tends to erode over time. Much of the surviving art from Sumer is ritualistic in nature. So we'll take a look at another piece from Sumer, the Warka vase. It's made out of alabaster. It's 36 inches high. It's in Baghdad right now. And it's basically one of the earliest examples of narrative found in art. So it actually tells a story. It tells a story that's told in a visual way, and that's told on this vase, and it's essentially a celebration of fertility. So the lowest level of the vase shows this wavy line, which is the Tigris or Euphrates rivers, which were basically the lifeblood of the crops and supplied all the food for the people of Sumer. And above that abstracted river there, we have alternating grains and date palms, so probably some other type of food that they ate. And then they had rams and ewes, which are, sheep. And then above that, we have nude men bringing baskets of food offerings here. And at the top, a man brings an offering to Inanna. You can't really see that very well in this picture, but she is the goddess of fertility. And she was a very important goddess to the people of Sumer. And she stands at the entrance of her temple, and she's receiving gifts from these men that bring her baskets of food and offerings. And Summer eventually fell to the